bookaholics, is Isabel and welcome to another video. So today I'm going to be talking about Lore by Alexandra Bracken. This will be a non-spoilery review, so if you have not read it yet, welcome to the video. Let me tell you a little bit about it. Now, before I get into the full review, I just want to let you know there are some trigger warnings in this book. There's trigger warnings for child murder, sexual harassment, rape, abuse, violence, and gore. So if any of those trigger you at all, this book may not be for you. So Lore follows this world where every 7 years, this thing called the Agon begins. So the Agon started as a punishment that Zeus dealt out to these 9 gods for their rebellion. For this punishment, they are forced to walk the earth as mortals, and during the Agon, the descendants of the bloodlines are hunting them, and if they do happen to kill one of the gods, they become divine and take on the god's power and become immortal. And so when one of those descendants kill a god, they become a god, and the next Agon, they are now part of the hunted as well. So that's how this world works. For this book, we follow the main character, Lore. Lore ran away from this world after her family were brutally murdered by one of their rival clans. So she turned her back on the world that she's always known. She pushes down her revenge against the person who killed her family and tries to ignore the world. But as the next Agon dawns in New York City, she is confronted by 2 people in her old world. One is Castor, who is her longtime friend who she thought passed away, and the other is the goddess Athena, who has been wounded and outside of her house. So that's pretty much what this novel is all about. Before I go any further, if you are coming to this book expecting a lot of Greek mythology, you might be disappointed and this might not be the book for you. This book, although it does have Greek gods and goddesses as characters, that's pretty much all that you get. We have a few mentions of other mythology stuff, but they don't actually have anything to do with this book. And we don't really dive into how the Greek gods affect this whole world. It's just that happens every 7 years. This Agon happens and the Greek gods come to the world. But there's nothing really else that is Greek about this. So honestly, if you switched out any of the gods for any other gods, you probably wouldn't notice anything different. So Alexandra Bracken could have honestly created her own gods and it probably wouldn't have affected the plot at all. Now that the introduction's over, let's just get right into the review. So I was pretty excited for this book when I heard about it. It sounded so interesting. The premise was such a unique take on the Greek mythology and what this story could do. I had high expectations and I was hoping for a lot from this book. Unfortunately, I did not like it. Now, it wasn't bad necessarily, it just wasn't very good. As I said, the premise of this book was actually quite interesting and I was quite intrigued by it. And I was excited to see where Alexandra Bracken would take it. But the execution was just a little bit lacking. I feel like part of this is that there was very little world building. Yes, we have this idea of the Greek gods coming to Earth every 7 years, but that's pretty much all we get. We don't get anything else outside of the world. We get like kind of certain glimpses of what this world is, but other than that, most of the building is at the very beginning, like the prologue, right before we get to the first chapter. And then things just don't get mentioned again, and there was times where I was super confused and had to reread different passages. Now, I was reading the audiobook, so part of that might be that I just wasn't invested in this book as much because it wasn't grabbing me based on the audiobook and the voice actor. But at the same time, there was just so many instances where I would have to rewind because I was listening. I was actively listening to it and I just got confused and I had to go backwards and listen to the passage again just to understand what was happening and remind myself what is going on in this world. So I feel like the world building was a little bit lacking. There was just an idea of how this world worked, but there was no actual building of like the past and how this world came to be in the time that Lore is alive. I actually did look up other reviewers and there was actually quite a bit of people who had the same problem as me with just being confused by what's going on and not really understanding it. So another thing I think that made this book just a little bit lacking is the characters. Now, the characters were actually quite uninteresting and kind of boring and kind of just the same old YA characters. And that's not to say anything bad about YA characters, it's just that I've seen them so many times throughout all the books that I've read that it's kind of just getting cliche and boring. So we follow a group of characters here. We follow Lore, the main character, we follow Athena and Castor, and we also follow Miles and Van. So this is the group that we generally follow in this book. And so what I found in this is that at the very beginning, I was actually quite intrigued by Lore, and I was excited to see who this character was. Her parents had passed away. You could tell that she was very affected by that. She had this kind of dark personality, and at the very beginning of the story, she is in a fist fight at this bar, and she's like making money by doing this, and actually quite interesting. I was quite intrigued to see who this character was. But then we kind of get into more of the plot, and as I'm learning, I just felt like her character wasn't developed enough. I actually heard that this was supposed to be like a feminist kind of book, which I could see in a way, but at the same time it was just so simplistic of a feminist. Like, it was honestly more just because she was a fighter and took things into her own hands. But then we just went into the typical, oh, should I or shouldn't I? Should I do this? Should I not? And it's just, I wanted a character who was just so gung-ho, ready to do what needed to be done. And that's kind of what it seemed like she was going to be. But then she just doubts herself all the time. I don't know. I was ready for a character who was just so willing to go out and fight and do what needed to be done. And she just never did, and I don't know. And then we had Athena, who I think Bracken was trying to display like this overwhelming goddess who's trying to take control of everything. And that's kind of what happened, but also she was just so weak. Like, honestly, I felt like she would have done more based on the fact that they still have their powers. They may not be immortal anymore, but they still get their powers. And like, I would have felt like Athena would have had more roles in here. I don't know, she just kind of felt underwhelming. I just never really felt like she was actually like a goddess. She just felt like someone who was very, I don't know if I want to say narcissistic, but was very controlling. And then we have Castor, who honestly, I didn't have any feelings for him. Castor was the love interest, but honestly, they were just kind of bland. But I think mostly because they had the past, maybe Alexandra Bracken thought that, oh, the past of them being a couple and having feelings for each other will be enough to transfer into the present. But we never actually get any background on their relationship. Like, we never actually go into how they started to like each other, how they started to enjoy each other's company. Like, we never really got any of that in the past. So how is that going to transfer into the present that we actually like them as a love interest? Because honestly, I didn't like them as a love interest at all. So they were just kind of bland and kind of there and not really interesting. The only characters that I actually enjoyed were Miles and Van. Like, they were the only ones that felt like they had any kind of character and felt actually genuine. Lore just kind of felt undeveloped. Castor felt just like there and doesn't really do anything. Athena was just this prototype of a goddess that didn't really feel like a goddess. But then we had Miles and Van, who actually felt like actual characters that were actually developed a little bit. They definitely helped me get through this story a lot more. Now, the plot itself, let's just get into the plot here. So we have a lot going on in this book. Like, there's a lot, there's so many adventures, they're going off in one direction to another direction to another direction and trying to find all these different things. And honestly, it was kind of just overwhelming. Well, not overwhelming, but it was honestly just so like bang, 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 boom. Doing this, doing that, doing this, doing that. And I was having a hard time following and just not really understanding why they're going to this thing and then why they're going to here. I did read some reviews that actually some people like that because it helped flow the story a little bit more, but honestly it kind of dragged it down for me. I think part of that was the world building. I was just so confused and I didn't really understand what everything was for. I just felt like it was just a little bit too much and it went in so many different directions that I was just confused most of the time. So that definitely doesn't help you with a book that you're trying to enjoy when you're confused, because then you don't enjoy it. And then we have the ending. Now I'm not going to explain what the ending is because that'd be spoilery, but the ending was just so confusing. Like, I just didn't understand one of the characters' motivations in here to do what she did. It just didn't really make sense to me, and I don't understand why she would have done all these things previous just to get this one item. Like, it just didn't make sense to me. And then we have the antagonist, who is honestly mostly in the background and doesn't really do anything. Like, we have a confrontation with him at the end, and honestly it was so anticlimactic, and there was just nothing. There was no point to him. Like, honestly, it felt like there's no point to this whole plot and towards everything that happened. Like, it just seemed like an excuse for a bunch of people to die and for there to be absolutely no reason for them to die. I don't know. I just felt like this story was more of a plot device to get people to buy it because it had Greek mythology in it, and she just came up with this weird Agon idea and went with it, but didn't really build anything, didn't really make a world around it, didn't really make a purpose for why the characters are doing these things, and didn't really even try to make a love interest or to actually get you to like the characters. So I don't know, I just felt like everything about this book was just underdeveloped. Like, the characters were underdeveloped, the love interest was way underdeveloped, the world building was not thought out very well, and the ending was just trash, honestly. Like, it just didn't make sense to me, and I just didn't understand any of the characters' reasoning. So I end up giving this book 2 out of 5 stars. I am just editing my review for this, and the more I thought about this book and the more I listen to other people's thoughts, this book just keeps getting on my nerves, and I honestly hate it. I am rating this book a 1 star. This whole book was just a mess. It was a mess, and it doesn't deserve the hype that it's getting. That is my review for Lore by Alexandra Bracken. Let me know your thoughts down below if you have read this book. If you're interested in reading it, let me know your thoughts after you finish. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed it. Give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!